Something big happened this week in Grand Forks. Well, big for some people. An international news item brought Grand Forks and Christina Lake onto the international landscape. Well, another chapter in that came to an end this week with the sentencing of Alan Piche for 2 infractions under 84.1 of the Wildlife Act. One of those infractions carried a $3,500 fine, the other one a $2,500 fine. Plus, the judge found that he should not feed any wildlife anywhere in BC at any time, and that he shouldn't leave any attractants on his property. The judge gave Alan a year to pay his fine, plus the victim's fine surcharge.
What do you think, Al?
Well, that's a broad question for a philosopher. You're asking me then how I feel about the sentence. I think it was a fair sentence. I fed bears and I got caught, and that's the fine.
Have you learned?
I've learned a tremendous amount from this case. A tremendous amount.
What have you learned?
I've learned about court procedures and dealing with lawyers, and I've learned that I think the ministry has some problems in the way they're approaching bears, and I think that in a way that came out in this case a little bit, and I would hope that they'll take some time to look at the situations and understand if you're in a unique situation, you need a unique answer.
Have you learned you shouldn't feed wild bears dog food?
I've learned that it's against the law and it's very expensive.
But you still think it's okay to do it?
No, I've never said that about anybody. As a matter of fact, in all the time I've talked to anybody, I've never said you should go out and feed bears.
Will you stop?
I was intending to stop anyway, and I will stop, of course.
How are the bears?
At the end of last season, after all the killings down street, I checked to see if my bears were still around, because they were still coming through, and September is a month where it's their last chance, it's the last check. And I found that all the bears were safe and doing okay, so that was my main concern, that the bears would get out of this okay, and I'm quite convinced that they did now, and so I'm quite satisfied with that.
The judge called this a flight of fancy and a foolish action. Do you agree?
Relative to me, or if anybody does this?
Anybody, or relative to you.
It's 2 different answers. Relative to other people, I don't think... there was a fellow who feeds bears out in East Coast, and it's legal for him to do that. And he said this little statement, he said, don't do this on your own, because it took me a long time to learn how to do this, and you have to do it properly. And so I would say that for me, not that I'm going to feed bears, but I feel confident that I could feed bears and not get them into dangerous situations where they would have trouble.
But you won't feed them?
No, I won't. I was stopping anyway. The point that this whole thing right from the very beginning is that I was going to stop doing this. My only question relative to the ministry was, how do we go about that? Do we go cold turkey, or can we have a little bit of tapering this off over a couple of years? They said cold turkey. I disagreed, and I helped myself a bit the second year and helped them. And that's another $2,500.
There's been a lot of media reports that you fed bears in order to guard a marijuana grow operation.
Well, that's absolutely untrue. What did I say recently about that? I was thinking, training bear. What was I training them for? Actually, a bear did something recently, and I said, I'm going to tell people that I trained them for that, which is a good thing, but I can't remember what it was. No, I never did that, never intended to do that. That came from one police officer who said, well, if a person was coming up here to steal this guy's crop, if he has a crop, then they would be intimidated by seeing the bears. And so that went out in the newscast that these were guarding. But no, that was never the case.
What do you think of the fact this story went around the world? We've got Russian anchors laughing at it. It was on the BBC. Your name went around the planet for feeding bears in Christina Lake.
I think that was unfortunate, because it was the way the story was put out by the newscasters and not by the situation itself. There's no reason for the story to even get as big as it did, but the news is more interesting if it's more interesting.
How do you feel a couple years down the road?
I feel relieved that it turned out in a sense, to just be an ordinary case. I was fined what I think typically I should have been fined. In fact, this is about $3,000 less than I had predicted myself, so that makes me feel all right. On a pension, it's $7,000 or $5,000 is still too much money, but that's the way it's got to be. That's the way it's got to be.
But relieved you're not going to jail, obviously.
I never thought I was going to jail.
I think it was 6,000, wasn't it? 25 and 35.
Didn't have enough.
Victim fine surcharge.
Oh, and the tax. There's taxes on it.
So about
Victim
7.
surcharge.
I think it's 50%, but I'm holding up.
Okay, so how are you feeling about the sentence, personally?
I feel relieved that it's finally done, and I feel that it was a just settlement considering the impression the court has to give. And this is to deter people from doing this sort of thing, so I would think $7,000 should deter some people.
So that answers my next question, if you think it was fair.
Yeah, I think it was fair.
Okay. You've seen the bears this spring?
I've seen some of them. Yeah, there's a lot less this year than last year. Last year, when I wasn't feeding, I saw every one of them. And 99% I didn't feed. I fed a little bit to get out to my car, to do this and that. So this year there was a lot less. But yeah, I saw Courage and her 2 new babies. Not 2 new babies, she had them last year. That's a 3-legged bear. And I wanted to see her for sure. And a few others have been and gone.
So how do you feel about their potential for the future? Will they survive?
I feel really good about that. I felt good about that last year. I felt good about that about the 4th year into this. I started to notice that a certain amount of my bears were now leaving. And the first thing I thought was like everybody else, because I was learning, have they gone to the neighbors to get shot? Have they done that now? But sure enough, the next spring they came back and just said, we're looking for girls. I said, it's a mating thing then. And so they went away and didn't stay to eat. They didn't go to a dump. And they came back. I've had them come back as much as 8 years later. Okay, so now 8 years later, they have taken care of themselves out there. They haven't had any problems with people, otherwise they'd be dead. So I feel that they're doing well and they're going to be okay. They're disappointed. I mean, I'd be disappointed too if there's a free restaurant down the street here. I'd be disappointed if they closed it up.
So is it going to be kind of hard to return to your home and not feed the bears? I mean,
not so much now. It was harder last year, the first year. But we've established, I know what it's like now to not feed a hungry bear and to go out and talk to them. And I've seen how they behaved. I've learned so much from this experience. I find it quite amazing that the ministry has never asked me a question of any kind. A man who's had 12 years experience every day, 7 months of the year, 7 days of the week, going out and meeting and feeding these bears and doing things with them, and yet they've never asked me one question about what I know about bears.
Well, maybe they didn't want to validate you before your sentencing. Maybe they'll come to you now.
I do want to talk to Mr. Badry, actually, the man who was presumably the expert behind all this, and talk to him about the future and what you do in a case that's as unusual as this. Is it right to use the same approach to it as you would to every other case of someone feeding bears?
What do you think of the whole ordeal, Alan?
I think it was a great learning experience in my life. I wouldn't have gotten to go through this unless I robbed a bank or something, and I'm not a bank robber. So, yeah, no, I thought it was a great experience. I was glad to see how the courts work. I was glad to see how your lawyers work. I'm not happy with everything that's done, but it's not like I'm going to change the system. So
I understand you're a pensioner, so can you afford the fine?
Nope.
How are we going to be able to pay it?
We'll start on that today. Start thinking about that today. Since I didn't know what it was going to be, I didn't want to make any. I did make my $10,000 prediction about 2 years ago. That would be about $10,000. So I've been thinking about how I could come up with $10,000 at this moment. In fact, this morning, a bulldozer showed up at my place and they're going to start logging my top 40 acres, which I never intended to do. Talk about your penalties. There's a terrible penalty. To have to cut down your trees to pay this fine, it just seems like...
So the logging was something that you wouldn't have done, but now you need the money.
It has been my avowed judgment from the very beginning when I got that property. I wouldn't cut down live trees. I cut down only 2 live trees in the 30 years that I've been there, and both were larches that when I first got here didn't know they weren't dead in the wintertime.
Any final words?
No, I don't think so. No.
Well, thank you, Alan, and good luck with that.
Thank you.
And that was Alan Piche. We'll see what the future holds for him, and of course we'll see what the future holds for his bears. I'm Les for GFTV here at the Grand Forks Courthouse.